So what if I told you that the next major economic superpower, the next region to just fundamentally reshape the global economy, might actually completely skip the Industrial Revolution?
I mean, sounds like science fiction, right? Or at least a radical rewriting of basically every macroeconomic textbook published in the last 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. No massive steel mills, no endless rows of assembly line factories spewing smoke, just a direct, unprecedented leap from subsistence farming straight into the digital age.
We are so conditioned to believe there's only one path to prosperity because, well, it's the path the West took, and it's the path East Asia took. You build factories, you forge a middle class, and then you transition to a service economy.
Right.
But the data we're looking at today suggests that entire narrative might just be completely obsolete.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we have a mission that is, frankly, incredibly ambitious, but honestly, it's vital if you want to understand where the world is actually heading.
It really is. We're unpacking this massive, multi-decade socioeconomic report focusing on IDA countries.
Right, the International Development Association nations. And this report tracks their progress from 1960 all the way to 2023.
And just to establish the baseline for you, the IDA is essentially the arm of the World Bank that partners with the world's most developing nations.
We're talking about countries that are either at the very beginning of their modern economic journeys or they're, actively fighting to transition into middle income status.
Exactly. And having a continuous 63-year data set on these nations is incredibly rare. I mean, it's a longitudinal X-ray of human progress.
It really is. And I have to say, the way this data is presented in the source material is striking. There's no spin here.
None at all. The aesthetic of the report is purely academic.
Yeah, it's minimalist, stark, pure white backgrounds, these low saturation slate grays and navy blues.
Right, no flashy 3D graphics or anything to distract you, just pure flat design.
Exactly. It strips away all the political noise and that daily news cycle panic, and it forces you to look entirely at the empirical reality of how a society evolves.
And what you see highlighted with just these simple, striking geometric shapes, like a thin circular outline or a stark single-color arrow, are the actual inflection points of history.
So today we're going to look at how their populations are shifting, how their economies are desperately trying to transform, the state of their human capital, their infrastructure, and the massive institutional risks threatening to pull them back under.
Because it's a comprehensive ecosystem. You cannot look at economic growth without looking at the health of the workers.
Right.
And you can't look at the workers without looking at the government managing them. The core logic of this entire 63-year trajectory is essentially a chain reaction.
Okay, lay that out for us.
So population dividends serve as the raw foundation. Economic transition is supposed to be the engine. Human capital, so education and health is the core fuel.
And institutional quality.
That's the safeguard keeping the whole engine from blowing up.
It's almost like if you've ever played one of those civilization building strategy games, you need the population base first, right?
Well, absolutely.
Then you have to figure out how to employ them, keep them healthy, build their infrastructure, and govern them without the whole thing just collapsing into debt.
That is a perfect analogy. So if the population is the foundation, we really need to start there.
Let's do it. Because the demographic makeup of these IDA countries has undergone this tectonic shift.
It really has. On the third page of this report, there's this striking double line chart.
Yeah, the one with the huge downward arrow.
Exactly. One line shows total population growth, and the other shows the percentage of the population made up of kids, specifically ages 0 to 14.
And historically, that number was hovering at an astronomical 44.6%. Almost half of the entire population of these nations were children.
Which is just, I mean, it's wild to think about. But over the decades, as highlighted by that bold downward arrow, that percentage has been steadily, relentlessly dropping.
Okay, but why does that matter so much?
Because it's the single most important prerequisite for national wealth accumulation. In development economics, we talk constantly about the age dependency ratio.
Meaning the ratio of dependence to the working age population?
Exactly. Dependents being children under 15 and seniors over 64.
Wait, so if 45% of your population is under 15, that means every single working age adult is essentially carrying multiple dependents on their back. The math there is just brutal.
It is entirely paralyzing for an economy.
Yeah.
When that ratio is that high, your working age adults are spending virtually 100% of their resources, their time, and their caloric energy just feeding and clothing those kids.
Just providing absolute basic shelter.
Right. And at a national level, It means the state is pouring all its meager resources into primary schools and pediatric clinics. There is zero surplus capital.
And if you can't save, banks have no deposits to lend to entrepreneurs.
Exactly. Without loans, businesses can't expand. Without expansion, there's no infrastructure. The entire society is trapped in this state of baseline maintenance.
But the data here shows that this youth dependency ratio is finally plunging. People are having fewer children, so that pressure is releasing.
Yes, and this ushers in the famous demographic dividend. Suddenly, the massive cohorts of children born in the 70s, 80s, and 90s are aging into the workforce.
Ah, I see.
But because birth rates have since dropped, they aren't having as many children themselves. The ratio violently flips.
So you suddenly have this massive, unprecedented surge in the working age population relative to the number of dependents.
Exactly. It's a huge demographic bulge.
This is exactly what happened with the East Asian tigers, right? Like
Yeah.
South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore in the late 20th century.
That is the exact historical parallel.
They hit this demographic window, suddenly had millions of unburdened young adults ready to work, and they rocketed from poverty to high income status in a single generation.
It's a rare, fleeting window where a nation has an army of potential workers and savers.
Hmm.
But, and this is the crucial caveat that will kind of haunt the rest of our discussion, a demographic dividend is not an automatic economic dividend.
Right, it's just potential energy.
Exactly. It's a double-edged sword. If you have millions of young adults flooding the labor market and your economy is not structurally prepared to absorb them into productive labor.
Then you don't get an economic miracle. You get mass youth unemployment, severe social unrest, and political instability.
Right.
Because if you have a massive influx of energetic, ambitious young people and absolutely nothing for them to do, isn't that just a recipe for a revolution, not a renaissance?
Precisely. The demographic bulge demands an economic engine capable of harnessing it. But before we look at the engine they built, we really have to recognize a profound triumph in the data regarding the workers themselves.
You mean their health?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that there are more working-age adults, the fundamental nature of their existence has changed.
This brings us to a part of the data that honestly made me pause. It's this scissors chart. Two lines crossing each other dramatically, moving in opposite directions.
It's on page 4, and they've actually circled the exact intersection point where the lines cross.
Yeah.
The very powerful visual.
On the left axis, going up, we have life expectancy at birth. In the early 1960s, the average across these IEA countries was roughly 42 years.
Let's just sit with that gravity for a second. 42 years old.
I mean, that is entirely incomprehensible to a modern Western listener.
It fundamentally limits what a society can achieve. But the trajectory since then is nothing short of a miracle.
Yeah, that life expectancy has surged upward to over 63 years today.
And concurrently, on the right axis, with this huge downward pointing arrow, the mortality rate for children under 5 has plummeted.
The sheer volume of human suffering that has been eradicated by those two converging trends is just staggering.
It really is. And just to clarify the metrics here, infant mortality is the probability of dying before exactly 1 year of age, while under 5 mortality extends that out to age 5.
Okay, so from an economic perspective, how does adding 2 decades of life fundamentally alter the trajectory of a developing nation? I mean, going from 42 to 63.
It completely changes the amortization schedule of human capital.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Think about society's investment in a human being. A family, a community, and a state invest massive resources into a child.
Yeah.
Food, basic education, healthcare, time.
Right.
If that individual historically passes away in their early 40s, society only extracts maybe 20 years of productive adult labor from that massive upfront investment.
The return on investment is incredibly truncated.
Exactly. But when life expectancy jumps to 63, you have literally doubled the productive economic lifespan of that individual.
Wow, yeah. You get 20 additional years of farming, teaching, building, saving, and consuming.
Right.
It's like suddenly finding a 50% increase in your battery life. The entire trajectory of what you can accomplish in one cycle completely changes.
That's a great way to look at it. And it changes the psychological horizon, too. If you reasonably expect to live to 65 instead of 40, your entire incentive structure shifts.
Because you start thinking long term.
Yes. You might plant a different type of crop that takes longer to yield but pays out more. You might save money for your old age. You might actually believe you have a future worth investing in.
And does the data back that up?
Absolutely. That psychological shift is well documented in economic literature. Longer life expectancies correlate directly with higher savings rates and an increased willingness to pursue complex, time-consuming education.
Okay, so returning to our core logic, we have a massive surge in the sheer number of workers due to the demographic dividend.
Yes,
And those workers are now living 20 years longer with a vastly extended productive life cycle. So the foundation is incredibly strong.
the foundation is there.
So the obvious next question is, what is the economy doing with all these long-living workers? Are they getting richer?
On an absolute macroeconomic level, yes. The data tracking per capita economic growth shows a relentless, resilient climb.
This is the step area chart on page 5, right?
Exactly. It's heavily annotated with all these global historical shocks. But if we look at per capita GDP, measured in constant 2015 US dollars to, strip out the illusion of inflation,
Right. Keep it grounded in real value.
it has climbed from a meager baseline of $72 to over $577 today.
Okay, looking at this chart, going from $72 to $1,077 is a massive multiplier. That's a 15-fold increase.
Such a huge jump.
But let's be real, $137 a year is still incredibly low on a global scale. I mean, how much of this growth is actually structural and how much is just population growth pushing the absolute numbers up?
That is the perfect question to ask here.
Yeah.
Because we have to look at the shape of that growth. The historical data shows a stair-step trajectory.
Okay.
These economies face massive external shocks over the decades. The oil crises of the 70s, the debt crises of the 80s, the 2008 global financial meltdown, the recent pandemic.
Just one thing after another.
Right. And yet the overall economic scale, particularly the gross national income, or GNI, has shown extreme resilience. It aggressively bounces back and climbs higher after every single shock. Especially in the early 21st century, the curve gets incredibly steep.
Wait, why GNI instead of GDP? Economists usually default to GDP when talking about growth.
Good catch. GDP measures what is produced strictly within the physical borders of a country. Gross national income includes that, but crucially adds net income received from abroad.
Ah. And for IDA countries, I'm guessing that distinction is vital.
It's massive because of the sheer scale of global remittances.
Right, the money sent home by citizens working overseas.
Exactly. You have a massive diaspora from these developing nations working in the Gulf states, in Europe and North America, and they send billions of dollars back home.
Wow.
In many of these countries, remittances constitute a double-digit percentage of their entire national income. It acts as this highly decentralized, incredibly efficient form of foreign aid.
Because it goes directly to households, bypassing corrupt government ministry.
Exactly. It builds houses, pays for school fees, and capitalizes small local businesses.
So they are surviving global shocks, partly because they are globally diversified through their own workforce. That makes total sense.
It's a huge buffer.
But internally, within their own borders, what is actually driving that growth? Because earlier we talked about the East Asian tiger model, using that massive young workforce to build factories, dominate global manufacturing, and export your way to wealth. Are these IDA countries doing that?
And this is where the X-ray reveals the anomaly, the most surprising structural twist in the entire report.
Yeah.
When we look under the hood at how these economies grew, and we slice them up by sector over the decades, we see a phenomenon that economists call premature deindustrialization.
Okay, let's look at the slices. This is represented by that 100% stacked bar chart separated by decades.
Yes, on page 6.
Right. Historically, any developing country starts with an economy dominated by agriculture, subsistence farming. As they modernize, the agricultural slice shrinks because farming gets more efficient, requires fewer people, and those people move to the cities.
And the data shows this happening perfectly here. The agriculture block is shrinking rapidly.
That's the standard first step. The orthodox model says those migrating farmers move to the cities and get jobs in the manufacturing sector. Textile mills, assembly plants, basic goods.
Right, the manufacturing sector should balloon, absorbing the demographic dividend.
But when I look at the manufacturing sector in this data highlighted by that gray dotted line, it's a flat line. It has been stagnant for decades.
It's completely dead in the water.
Instead, the service sector has just exploded, ballooning from roughly 39% of the economy early on to over 50% today. They skip the factories entirely.
They bypass the industrial phase. This is radically atypical. The historical path to national wealth, the route taken by Britain, the U.S., Germany, Japan, China, relies on manufacturing.
Because manufacturing is unique, right?
Yes, it is the ultimate engine for absorbing massive amounts of relatively unskilled labor and providing them with formal, structured, wage-paying employment. And the source definition of manufacturing here is literally the physical or chemical transformation of materials or components into new products.
Right, making actual stuff. It's like skipping high school and going straight to college, but you haven't learned the foundational math yet.
Exactly.
Factories historically built the middle class. They standardize hours, they pay a predictable wage, they lead to labor organizing, which leads to worker protections, which leads to disposable income, which eventually creates a demand for a domestic service economy. If you skip them, what happens to all those young workers we talked about earlier?
This is the exact fear, and the data confirms it. This skipping of manufacturing directly explains the severe crisis in the labor market.
Wait, why is this happening, though? Why can't they just build factories like South Korea did in the 80s or China did in the 90s?
Because the global economic landscape has fundamentally changed. When East Asia industrialized, there was massive global demand for cheap labor to manufacture basic goods, and they cornered that market.
Okay.
Today, IDA countries are trying to industrialize in a world where China already exists and has perfected economies of scale.
Hmm.
Furthermore, global manufacturing is increasingly automated.
Oh, right. Robots.
Yeah, a modern factory in Vietnam or Mexico requires far fewer workers than a factory did 40 years ago. The latter has effectively been pulled up.
So the path is blocked. And that leads to a terrifying realization. If you have millions of young people entering the workforce, our demographic dividend, and you don't have factories to put them in, where do they go?
They go into the service sector.
Yep.
But we need to define what services means here.
Right, because it is not what someone in London or New York pictures.
Not at all. In a highly developed economy, the service sector means software engineers, financial analysts, marketing executives, or, structured retail and hospitality.
But in an IDA country experiencing premature deindustrialization, the service sector is not tech or finance. It is the informal economy.
Overwhelmingly so. The data on the labor market trap is brutally clear. We have this scatter plot matrix or dumbbell chart on page 7.
Yeah, showing the massive gulf between formal jobs and the reality on the ground.
Right. And we are seeing extremely high levels of what the report classifies as vulnerable employment. For women in these economies, circled in red on the chart, the rate of vulnerable employment persistently hovers above 80%.
Over 80%.
Yes. And even for men, it is alarmingly high, coupled with a massive absolute gap in overall male versus female labor force participation.
Let's break down vulnerable employment because it sounds like bureaucratic jargon, but the reality on the ground is stark. We are talking about street vendors, unregulated transit drivers, day laborers on construction sites, domestic workers.
It means employment that exists entirely outside the regulatory framework of the state.
Meaning no safety net at all.
Exactly. There are no contracts, there is no minimum wage, there is no employer-provided health insurance, no Social Security contributions, no paid sick leave, and no pension.
Oh.
If a street vendor breaks her ankle, she simply ceases to earn money that day. Her income drops to zero instantly.
So, returning to our initial question, did they capture the demographic dividend? The answer is no. They spawned millions of new workers. Those workers are living 20 years longer. But because they couldn't build the factories, the fundamental baseline of the IDA labor market remains informal employment.
Trapped in low productivity, high-risk, daily survival trading. The dividend is being squandered.
If the formal economy isn't absorbing these workers, isn't the demographic dividend actually a ticking time bomb? What is being done to make these workers more employable?
It's a profound structural bottleneck, and you're right, it's dangerous. The primary tool to make workers employable, to take a street vendor or their child and integrate them into a higher value formal economy, is education.
Right.
And this leads us to one of the greatest quantitative triumphs and qualitative tragedies in the entire data set.
Okay, let's start with the breakthrough, because it deserves recognition. We're looking at a multi-series line chart on page 8, tracking education over time.
Yes, and the data tracking youth literacy and primary school enrollment is a massive victory.
For decades, the global development community agonized over the gender gap in education. The fact that families would send their sons to school but keep their daughters home to work or marry early.
But look at the line with the thin arrow pointing to it. The gross enrollment rate for primary school girls shows a rapid, steep climb.
It's incredible.
And there's a node circled here. The Gender Parity Index, or GPI, for youth literacy measuring ages 15 to 24, has successfully approached 1.0, complete parity.
Young women are reading at the exact same rate as young men. That alone is a civilizational shift.
It is monumental. The gender gap in educational participation has essentially been closed, and youth literacy overall has skyrocketed from around 56% to over 83% today.
Moving an entire population from roughly half literate to overwhelmingly literate is a qualitative transformation in the cognitive capability of the new generation.
Exactly. They can read contracts, they can follow complex agricultural instructions, they can engage with digital interfaces. They have democratized the starting line.
So we've effectively built the on-ramp to the highway. Everyone is getting in the car and everyone is getting on the road. But where are they actually driving?
Well, while the on-ramp is crowded, the pipeline itself is leaking disastrously.
And this is where the data gets incredibly depressing.
Mm.
This horizontal funnel chart on page 9, it starts wide and gets terrifyingly narrow.
We call it the education quality funnel. Getting kids in the door isn't the same as keeping them there or ensuring they learn.
Right.
The enrollment at the start of the funnel is massive, but then the completion rate for primary school drops to roughly 74%.
You've lost a quarter of your children before they are even 12 years old.
And then the transition to lower secondary school, what we would consider middle school or junior high, falls off an absolute cliff. The completion rate drops to less than 51%.
Over half of the entire youth population is dropping out before finishing a basic ninth grade education.
It's a catastrophic systemic failure.
But why are they dropping out? Is it just a lack of schools, or is it because, as we saw in the labor data earlier, families actually need these teenagers to enter the informal economy just to survive?
You've hit the nail on the head. Economic pressure is massive. The microeconomics of a household relying on vulnerable employment are incredibly fragile.
Right.
Imagine a family where both parents are street vendors. They have zero savings and zero safety net. If an economic shock hits, a drought causes food prices to spike, or a parent gets malaria and can't work, the household faces an immediate cash flow crisis.
And the only asset they have left to deploy is the labor of their children.
Exactly. The opportunity cost of keeping a 13-year-old in school becomes too high. The family literally needs that teenager to leave the classroom and head to the local market just to generate enough daily cash to buy dinner.
So the systemic failure of the labor market directly destroys the education pipeline. It's a vicious cycle.
It is.
And the macroeconomic consequence of this is devastating. I mean, this high dropout rate at the secondary level is the core pain point preventing these economies from moving up the middle to high-end value chain.
Exactly.
You cannot build a modern high-value service economy or an advanced manufacturing sector if half your workforce doesn't have a high school equivalent education.
You are structurally capped.
Yeah.
You are doomed to remain in the low-skill informal sector. But to even reach the age where dropping out of middle school is a problem, a child first has to survive childhood.
True.
And here, we must acknowledge a profound, undeniable victory in global cooperation, the establishment of the public health defense wall.
This connects directly back to that scissors chart of life and death from earlier. And on page 10, we have this minimalist gauge chart. It looks like a speedometer pushing all the way into the green.
Yes, the data here tracks historic leaps in vaccination rates. Specifically, the DPT vaccine, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus, and the measles vaccine.
Historically, these vaccination rates were in the single-digit percentages in these countries.
But today, they have surged past 76% coverage.
That's amazing.
It is the direct driver of the plummeting child mortality rate. And it didn't happen by accident. It highlights the massive success of global multilateral health assistance.
Organizations like GAVI. Right?
Yes, coordinating with national health systems. Building a vaccination network in a developing nation requires maintaining a cold chain, training local staff, reaching remote villages. It proves that targeted, internationally backed interventions can build a foundational defense wall against infectious diseases.
It's like installing basic antivirus software across an entire global network. Suddenly, the system doesn't crash from the most common bugs anymore.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
But while human health is improving, the health of the environment in these rapidly developing nations is paying the price. This brings us to the energy and environment tug-of-war.
Right on page 11, we have a dual-axis chart here, bar charts showing the energy mix overlaid with a line chart tracking total greenhouse gas emissions.
And what we see are synchronized upward trends in both methane from agricultural sources and CO2 emissions from electricity and industrial sources.
The harsh reality of development economics is that economic development here is still deeply coupled with resource consumption.
To raise living standards, you have to burn stuff.
Exactly. Even though renewable energy has a foothold, the relentless pursuit of electrification and whatever industrialization is happening means that carbon emissions from industrial combustion and the power sector are accelerating.
I mean, I have to say, it feels incredibly hypocritical for the developed world to point fingers at these IDA countries for emissions when they are literally just trying to get their citizens electricity.
It is the ultimate ethical friction point.
Is there any way for them to decouple growth from emissions at this stage? Can they leapfrog the dirty industrial phase and go straight to green energy?
Theoretically, yes. But practically, integrating intermittent renewable energy requires incredibly sophisticated infrastructure and massive upfront capital. And decoupling requires incredibly strong, efficient government policy.
Which brings us to the most vulnerable part of the entire IDA framework: institutions, the governance. Because if you want to build a green grid or fix the leaky education funnel, the government has to actually function.
Exactly. And on page 12, we evaluate this using a metric called the CPIA, the Country Policy and Institutional Assessment.
The chart for this looks like a radar chart or a heat map,
Yeah.
but it's really lopsided.
Yes. The CPIA is a rigorous diagnostic tool that scores the quality of a country's governance. And the data reveals a fascinating disconnect.
There's an error pointing to a relatively high score for macroeconomic management above 3.5.
Right. Over the last few decades, central banks and finance ministries have actually gotten much better at managing inflation and currency, the macro stuff.
So the guys at the top know what they're doing, but then there's this glaring depression circled on the chart for public sector transparency and anti-corruption. It scores poorly, below 2.9.
It represents a catastrophic vulnerability. The underlying institutional quality, the day-to-day administrative efficiency and corruption control, remains the shortest board in the barrel. It severely restricts their intrinsic growth potential.
So the captain of the ship is pretty good at reading the map and steering the wheel. That's the macro management. But the hull of the ship is leaking and the crew is taking bribes. That's the public administration.
That is exactly what's happening. The macroeconomic plan might be sound, but the lack of administrative integrity destroys the microeconomic execution.
And when the ship leaks, you have to borrow money to fix it. Enter the ghost of debt.
Yes. On page 13, we see the external vulnerability.
It's a stacked bar chart with a trend line that forms this terrifying U shape.
The data is tracking the ratio of public debt service to exports. And in macroeconomic data, a U-shape involving debt is the ultimate red flag.
Let's explain the mechanics of external debt, because it's different from a regular person getting a loan.
Right. When a developing nation borrows money internationally, they typically must repay that loan in a hard currency, almost always U.S. dollars.
And how do they get those U.S. dollars? By exporting goods.
Exactly. Because IDA countries haven't structurally transformed to create high-value exports. Remember the lack of manufacturing we discussed?
Right, they're just exporting raw materials or basic agriculture.
Exactly. So their export earning capacity hasn't leaped forward.
Now, tracing the U-shape, there is a clear trough circled on the chart following the heavily indebted poor countries or HIPC debt relief initiatives.
In the 90s and 2000s, the global community forgave a massive portion of their legacy debt. It was a huge victory.
But look at the right side of the U-shape. There's a sharp, alarming rebound in recent years. The debt is rocketing back up.
Rising debt service pressure is actively squeezing the fiscal space that should be going to education and health. The ghost of the debt crisis is back.
We forgave their debt once, and it just built right back up. Doesn't this prove that without fixing the corruption and deindustrialization issues we just talked about, debt relief is just a temporary Band-Aid?
Absolutely. The debt relief was a reset button, but it didn't fix the underlying engine. Systemic innovation is needed.
So they are trapped.
Well, luckily, there is one area where a massive, unexpected systemic innovation has occurred.
Okay, let's look at it.
It's the digital leapfrog on page 14.
Oh, this is a beautiful chart. It's an S-curve, an exponential growth line rocketing upward.
It tracks mobile cellular subscriptions. For decades, it sits at absolute zero. And then it jumps, just an exponential explosion, to over 86 per 100 people.
This is technological leapfrogging.
Yes. Instead of spending billions laying copper wire for landlines, which was physically and financially impossible, IDA countries jumped straight to the mobile internet.
It's the ultimate shortcut. They didn't just walk faster along the path. They took a helicopter over the mountain.
And this is the most successful technological leap in the data, because this digital infrastructure has created incredibly fertile ground for inclusive innovations.
Like mobile payment systems, M-Pesa is the famous one.
Exactly. It brings the unbanked informal sector into a digital financial ecosystem. They also have digital agriculture networks now.
So the question is, how do we take the success of this mobile helicopter and apply it to the rest of the economy?
That brings us to the final page, the core insights and strategic implications. It's laid out in a four-quadrant matrix.
Let's review them. Quadrant 1, population and employment.
There is an urgent need to formalize the informal sector to turn the demographic dividend into an actual economic dividend.
Quadrant 2, human capital.
Policy must shift from just getting kids into school enrollment to actually ensuring they learn skills that transfer to the real world. Stop the leaky funnel.
Quadrant 3, industrial upgrading.
We must be vigilant about premature deindustrialization. The new path might not be traditional factories, but using the new digital infrastructure to breed modern, high-value services and advanced manufacturing.
And finally, quadrant 4, institutions.
Enhancing debt transparency and deepening anti-corruption reforms are literally the only ways to build immunity against global economic shocks.
This has been an incredible journey through the data, and I want to remind you, the listener, why this matters to you. Whether you're an investor, a policy wonk, or just a curious global citizen, understanding this specific blueprint helps you understand where the global economy is heading over the next 50 years.
It really does. The populations in the West are aging. The future of global consumer demand is in these nations.
Exactly. The success or failure of these IDA nations is the success or failure of the global supply chain, global climate goals, and global security.
We are all tied to this data.
We really are. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We saw how brilliantly these nations leapfrogged landlines straight to mobile phones. As AI and automation begin to dismantle the traditional manufacturing models of the West, could the IDA countries' premature deindustrialization, their splitting of the factory floor entirely, actually position them to leapfrog straight into a new digital-first economic model that we haven't even named yet?
Wow, that's a fascinating perspective.
Right. Is their greatest weakness actually a blank slate for the future? Something to think about. Until next time.